So over the last week, I've kind of been on this kick where I've been talking about, is the MMORPG genre waiting to die? I've done a video on it. It's in the upper right-hand corner. I did a stream on it. And the truth is, as I was looking around a couple of my favorite websites, I came across this article at Massively OP, and I'm going to put a link to the article down below because Massively OP is a great website if you're looking for news, if you're looking for some editorial pieces. I think they do a really good job. I like most of the writers there, but this question of, are we optimizing the fun out of MMOs? And the answer is yes, and I think this is why the genre is dying. And I want to go through what some of the different experts said, experts as in editorialists. And I really like what Bree said about MMORPGs. The most memorable bits are found in scoring a great plot for your house, making a new friend in a dungeon, making a server first crafted item, leading your guild to PvP victory, finally ganking that jerk who's been picking on newbies, soloing a group fight for a rare weapon, flirting in the cantina, winning a costume contest. The drama in the cracks of the game, the gaps in the mechanics, the spaces human fill with human nonsense, the best kind of nonsense, the sticky and compelling kind. And then the optimizing the fun out came. Optimizing game loops means tightening those gaps, narrowing them, sometimes in well-meaning ways because who wants design downtime, right? But we certainly lose some fun in the process. And pretty soon, the devs have gotten exactly the more mundane, predictable, monetized behavior they designed for. And I made a note here, and this is exactly what the problem in ArcAge was. If you played ArcAge back in the day, any length of time, you knew that your evening, your early afternoon and evening was going to be Abyssal, Luskas, then Miss Marrow, then Crimson Rift. You would run your Hiram dailies, you would do Grimgrass Rift, and then other than your own personal trade runs, there was none of that engaging with people in just silliness. Is a game that is full of nothing but grinding a good game? And as I've been reflecting on the MMORPG space lately, I think to myself, you know what? I think the grind is necessary. And I really can't believe I'm saying that. And you can disagree with me if you think I'm wrong. But what happened was we used to take 5, 6 imperfect players, imperfect builds, imperfect specs, and we used to sit around for a couple of hours and get to know people. You would chat during the downtime while you were sitting and drinking a juice and eating a cookie. We don't have that anymore because everybody wants the downtime cut out. They want nonstop, constant action with nothing down, and then they complain that the MMORPG space isn't social anymore. Well, it's not going to be social if you optimize the game loop. Now, if you take a game like Final Fantasy XIV and you know the joke about the walking sands, then you know sometimes an optimized game loop is good. Taking out a bunch of filler is good. In an MMORPG where the game doesn't start until max level, sometimes just cutting through all the crap and putting everybody at max level is exactly the right solution. One of the other authors, Chris Neal, said, players arguably are the first to optimize the fun out of MMOs. That's what meta builds and the associated gatekeeping ends up being all about. But there's a solid argument that these things don't happen until the dev's vision is handed out to the players at scale, and they find out their vision doesn't track with the reality of that scale. And this is absolutely another huge problem in games. The biggest one being, you remember WoW? You remember WoW 15 years ago, and you got into your first raid group, your first raiding guild, and they found out you didn't run Deadly Boss mods? Deadly Boss Mod is not playing a video game anymore. Deadly Boss Mod is playing WoW, and you're playing Dance Dance Revolution, DBM, whatever DBM tells you to do, you do. I remember being just so insulted by the first raiding group I was in that said, you need to install DBM. I'm like, but then I'm not gaming. I'm following instructions. I was a mage, and I happened to look up the Classic Mage Best Add-ons Guide WoW Classic 1.13. How many add-ons are we going to have? Like, I remember Decursive, right? I remember Decursive was a mandatory thing for whichever dungeon it was because mages had removed Lesser Curse. And then you got range display. And then you've got all these different add-ons. And then WoW has basically got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 options when it comes to questing mods. Are you even playing the game at this point? And if you think you're playing the game, is this sort of explaining why MMORPGs aren't fun anymore? Because you're not playing a game, you're being led by the nose from objective to objective to objective. One of the things I hate about Final Fantasy XIV is that there's no real exploration. It is quite literally, here's a quest, here's a map, here's the location. If you hit map, it'll tell you exactly where to go. If you get there and there's a mob you have to kill, there's a queue over the mob's head. I remember its predecessor, Final Fantasy XI. Final Fantasy XI didn't tell you anything about the quest. It was like literally, there's a guy who may be out there somewhere between Bastok and Juno who might have something that you want to talk to him about. One of the games that is in development that I do have hope for is Ashes of Creation. Now, I don't want to speak too highly of it because Alpha 2 is coming this year, and I really want to reserve to did they deliver. But what I did enjoy in Ashes of Creation Alpha 1 was a little bit more of the go find it. Go find the objective. Go figure it out. Go engage with the dialogue. Did you remember the dialogue? Did you remember what the quest giver told you? How many people were you looking for at that cave? What were their names? It took quite a while for us to find one of those people because it isn't got an idiot light on top of it. The other thing, meta, what Neil was talking about is you've got the meta idea. And you've got, that's what meta builds and the associated gatekeeping ends up being all about. Unfortunately, far too many games have a sort of mentality that if you're not running the absolute right build, the absolute right spec, the absolute right gear, the absolute this or the absolute that you're no good. I have it noted here talking about even in a laid back game like Final Fantasy XIV, there would be people that would be upset if you were running Paladin because Paladin didn't have the DPS output of Warrior. Now you're talking about a dungeon filled with pugs, a pickup group from a duty finder, an automatic matchmaker, and people being upset they got matched with a Paladin instead of a Warrior. You're literally talking about the dungeon taking 17 minutes instead of taking 15 minutes and 30 seconds. EVE Online was another great example of this. You either ran the prescribed meta fit, or a lot of times your corp mates would laugh at your kill mail, or you would even have some corporations that would kick people out of the corp and not reimburse them for an expensive ship to say, we only reimburse if you're running the exact build. If we look at what Justin said, it happens. If you're a teacher and you don't tell the kids where to sit in the first day of school, by day 3, they will have picked their seats for the whole year and never change. So sometimes for our own good or the good of others, we have to shake it up. Disturb the meta, so to speak. And MMORPGs are in a unique position to do that because they are ever-changing, ever-evolving games. One of the biggest things about MMORPGs is that the developers need to realize that they're not necessarily the smartest people in the room. And I know it's hurtful to say, but a lot of developers build what they build and they think they built it perfect. Maybe the developers at Tryon Worlds intended for a Chloromancer to be the #1 healer and the #5 DPS in a 25-person raid. But I'm willing to bet that they intended for the Chloromancer to be sort of a lower healer and lower damage, kind of doing both, but not to the extent that Chloromancer was literally, are you healing? Yes. Are you a Chloromancer? Yes. Here's your 2-button macro build and go have fun. I would argue that an Arcage, Jake Song and his team at XL Games, they probably didn't anticipate a Dreambreaker, and I don't know what the Korean name is, but I don't think that they anticipated a Dreambreaker being as absolutely broken as it was in arenas, as American players figured out. I'm pretty sure that they never intended for Eben songs to be really sacrificing a lot of their mobility from taking another skill tree and building into Songcraft specifically to take Zeal for a damage buff. And that's totally okay. One of the things the developers should smile about is, oh my God, our players took what we put together and they built this. And they should be proud of that. But the developers should also be willing to sit down and say, this needs a nerf. And as I've talked about on other occasions, developers need to learn how to nerf. You should not be getting a 17-page combat rebalance at a time. Tap, tap, tap. Today we're going to rebalance this, that, and the other, and we're going to see where we're at. We're going to make a few changes and see where we're at. We have 17 pages of things we think we're going to need to do, but we're going to do 5 of the things off the first page today. It's all too often that we don't have a gradually shifting meta. What we have is we have a pendulum swing meta, and suddenly this is the meta, now this is the meta, now this was great, and tomorrow this is great, and the thing that was great yesterday sucks, and the players get frustrated. I don't want to have 300 hours invested into a character, getting certain gear, getting certain like add-ons, trinkets, whatever the thing in your game you have to develop is, for the developer to come along and say, you know what? Nah, you've been powerful for too long. The goal should be balance. And yes, we have to shake up the meta. We have to shake up the most efficient tactic available, but we don't need to keep turning the game on its head. What else we got is, I don't think they're optimizing the fun away. That sounds like the kind of argument that some players might use to argue that a game shouldn't have a minimap or a group finder, as if the fun was screwing around for an hour waiting for the actual game you want to play to begin. Now, I don't necessarily agree with the idea that thinking a minimap shouldn't be in game. Personally, I am directionally dysfunctional. I want a mini-map. I want a map. I want a map with a dot on it that says you are here. I don't need idiot lights. I just need a little bit more help figuring out where I am. I have a massive amount of respect for players who can play in an area and they know that the most optimal place to launch an ambush is 17 steps left of the big gray rock. I respect those players. Group Finder. I'm not going to go into Group Finder because it's a hot topic. If you want to talk about Group Finder, leave a comment down below. I think Group Finder is good for facilitating the linking up of players. I think where a lot of people would disagree is a Group Finder with an auto transport to the dungeon is bad, but a Group Finder that puts people in like a chat room so they can talk. EVE Online allowed for custom chat rooms. A couple other games have allowed for custom chat rooms. I think a Group Finder chat room specific to a dungeon might be some sort of good middle ground, bringing the social back. And then finally, we had, as a player, I think it's only a problem if you let it be. It's easy to fall into the trap of feeling like you have to do X, Y, Z, because that's the optimal path. I often do it myself. But it's important to remind yourself that perfect optimization is unnecessary for most content. Keep perspective and follow your joy. For developers, it's trickier. There will always be players who optimize every drop of fun out of the game, and those for whom the optimization is the fun. Trying to figure out how to balance the game for them without ruining the experience for average players is one of the most difficult challenges of our genre, and one for which there is probably never going to be a single neat answer. I do, however, that often the best thing to do is just ignore those sorts of players, or at least prioritize them. Design for the majority, not the 1%. And I absolutely 100% agree with this idea. I think one of the smartest things that both Final Fantasy XIV and WoW has done is create an elite level of dungeon that is supposed to be the be-all, end-all of only the best people can complete this content. I think where we have a flaw is that content then becomes farmable, it becomes sellable, you can carry people through it. I think that if we really want to develop for the 1%, the dungeons need to be so punishing that if one person isn't doing their job, the whole team fails. And that way you can't sell elite mythic dungeon runs. You can't sell extreme dungeon runs. I do think that the nail was hit on the head. Develop for the majority, but create things that keep the minority busy. It's like giving a noisy baby a rattle. Most of the noisy players, the vocal minority, just want something to do. Give them harder content. Give them evolving content. Give them computer-generated, random seed-generated dungeons, or make a couple of your dungeons repeatable. Final Fantasy XIV has the Palace of the Dead. You can do it solo. You can climb the 200 levels of the tower. Things like that that keep the 1%ers in a corner by themselves, quiet, not berating other people, because you need to have some level of casual, you need to have some level of middle ground, you have to have some level of try hard, and then you need to have the absolute 1%ers who, if you don't have them, then really people say, oh, the game is too easy and it's casual, it's a walk in the park. Again, I have put a link to that article down below if you want to read what some of the readers have said, what some of the commenters have said. And again, I want to thank Massively OP. I'm using their content, and I want to make sure that everybody goes over there, checks them out a couple of times, because they are a really good source of editorial. They are a really good source of MMORPG news. And as always, I will see you guys next time.